Ad Orientum, and that is the position of the priest in the Mass. I have hair that stand on end every time I hear somebody saying that the priest has turned his back to people. The priest is not turning his back to people. The priest is standing with people, exercising a certain ministry in a different place in the church community, but he is celebrating Mass with the people. This is another link with every other rite in the Catholic Church, in that all of the rites, including the traditional Roman rite, the priest stands with the people, facing traditionally east, and not technically east, at least traditionally east, and that's why you have Ad Orientum, which from the earliest time of the church community indicates the rising of the sun, and that is symbolic of the coming of the Lord. And so the priest stands leading his people, as a shepherd leads his people, waiting in anticipation for the end of time, and offering glory and praise to God. I remember the two things that I had at my oral exam before my ordination. That is, what is the role of the priest? I remember I was all tongue-tied. It was hard to boil it down into something in 1 minute. And it said the role of the priest is very simple, is to offer the gifts on behalf of the people and to sanctify the people with God's blessings. And so when the priest stands at the altar, surrounded by the people, he offers the gifts so that God will bless them and transform them into his very presence within the community. And when the priest turns to the people and greets them with Dominus Vobiscum and offers the blessing of the people, it is the sanctification of the people. So that simple action that the priest performs during Mass is very clearly marked during Mass. So it's really not good, it's not a very good way for us to speak about the priest turning his back to the people. He's standing with the people. And as I said, this is a commonality with every other rite. If I take a look at the second section here on the separation of sanctuary from the nave, even in the most modern parishes, the sanctuary is always separate from the nave. It is always demarked by a certain number of stairs or steps leading to the sanctuary. Why does this take place? Why does this occur within the Christian church? Well, we might say that it occurs because there's a sense of sacrality, and there are concentric circles of sacredness. First of all, we say that the world itself is sanctified by the presence of God within it. Secondly, we look at the church community, the church itself, the temple in which the people gather. That is a place that is sanctified by God's presence in a particular way in the body of Christ, which is there in the community of believers. The church is further demarked by marking off the sanctuary in the place of the liturgical action as another part of that concentric circle in which it emphasizes the holiness of the actions which are occurring. It's marked even further, if we want to be very careful, at the altar itself when the priest opens the corporal and the bread and wine are placed on the corporal. That is the most defined portion of the sense of sacredness that occurs within the church community itself. And therefore, everything related to it, whether it is the separation with the communion rail, whether it is the posture that we have, whether it's standing or kneeling, the sense of reverence, the position of receiving communion and so on, whether it is the veiling of the objects at the altar, the veiling of the chalice, the bread and wine prior to the consecration. In the oldest traditional form, the rood screen itself, which after during the Counter-Reformation was taken down in many of the churches, European churches, which still exist in many of the English churches, as a divider, whether it's the rail itself, everything that we use during the liturgy, every sacred action is there for a particular purpose, and that is to emphasize the sacredness of the things that we are dealing with, the sacredness of the actions, the sacredness of the objects themselves as being sanctified. So whether they are through the kissing of the objects themselves, whether it is the use of the particular vestments, the veiling, and so on, all of these are forms which have been standardized in order to speak of the otherness, the sacredness of the things that we are dealing with. These are not everyday objects. These are not everyday actions. They are particularly sacred actions In the traditional form, there are no concelebrants. Concelebration fell away in the Tridentine form, precisely because it does not look at emphasizing the commonality of the priesthood, which the celebration deals with, but rather it emphasizes the uniqueness of the priesthood. And so the priest stands, traditionally it's said, in the altar Christus, in order to emphasize the priestly ministry of Jesus Christ himself, who sanctifies the world. As a result, there are, when the distribution of communion, only those who are in sacred orders distribute communion. So therefore, there are no extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist. Like I said, there were no concelebrants, and it is restricted in the distribution of communion. There are no lay readers in the Tridentine form also, partly because the reading of the first reading, which most lay readers would participate in the Novus Ordo, is the purview of the subdeacon himself. And so when there's at a solemn high mass, the subdeacon reads the first reading, but at a mass in which there's only a priest, he assumes the ministry of the priest and the deacon and the subdeacon, and it does not devolve onto a lay person. And therefore, there are no lay readers. And anyways, the two areas I'm going to deal with is the Ad Orientum, that is, the priest stands with the people, and I like the idea of the concentric circles of holiness that we move to more defined images of holiness, and therefore everything, whether it's the vestments or the objects or the actions themselves, point to that sense of holiness. And that is found, as I said, in every rite, in the Byzantine rite, whether it's the icon screen, in the Armenian rite, whether it's the curtaining of the sanctuary, in the Roman rite, it is through the communion rail and the use of the particular language itself. These are ways of veiling the sacred in order to emphasize the sacrality.